Sigma males and the masculine identity. This is Rad Blather, and I'm your blatherer. When I heard about the term Sigma male, I couldn't help but laugh at what I saw, and I'm clearly not the only one who had that reaction. Sigma male is the new embodiment of Three Wolf Moon. It is a Gen Z targeted rebranding of the same tired, strong, silent type that gave us wife-beating John Wayne fans among boomers and woman-hating fedora neckbeard samurais among my generation of millennials. But this video isn't really about the idea of a Sigma male or even the nonsense hierarchy of males it's supposed to exist in. What it's really about is how someone slips into buying into personally and socially harmful identities. It's about how someone can be convinced that they are what someone else, a stranger with an agenda, is telling them they should be. My motivation. Seeing this Sigma male stuff made me want to put my own message out there because I consider who I am now and how I became that person, and I have to admit to myself that it's not so strange for boys and young men to latch onto identities that seem silly from my perspective today, especially given the social and technological landscape of today. After all, who doesn't want a strong identity? A strong identity reminds you that you have power in circumstances that would otherwise leave you feeling powerless and directionless, which are normal ways for young people to feel. When it comes to the internet, which is where I spent a lot of time at that age, I think it's generally become a more difficult place to hold on to one's sanity and confidence. If I were targeted the way that young people are targeted online nowadays, I very well might have bought into the culture of misogyny represented by the hierarchy of men and the Sigma male as its latest archetype. The internet. The way it once were. In the late 90s, when I was a preteen, I was an avid internet user in its early days of mainstream acceptance. I was mostly occupied with video game content, one of my proudest achievements having been to pirate a Japanese-only release of Pokemon at the age of 9.
Pokemon Green is the rarest Pokemon type.
But the internet was a different place back then. At that time, you needed to do much more work to find things. Targeted ads didn't exist, there were no endlessly scrolling social media feeds trying to figure you out, and Google, now synonymous with search engine, didn't even exist yet. If you had an interest, you typed it into Yahoo, AltaVista, or another of the multitude of search engines that no longer exist, and sifted through what came up. Results were not great back then, and it was not uncommon to have to go to 2 or 3 pages of search results to find something even remotely relevant to your query. Buried in the results, I would find links to super specific forum posts on independent message boards that served as my on-ramps to independent, interest-focused communities. Places like Game FAQs, Hard OCP, private torrent trackers, and all kinds of other defunct websites that I can no longer remember. Websites like these were like being part of a 24/7 nerd convention, whatever you were a nerd for. The internet. The way it currently do. Things are now a bit more complex than that. Nowadays, we've got social media platforms that see themselves as microcosms of, or perhaps even replacements for, the vast and decentralized internet. Rather than your conversations about video games, gardening, and weightlifting taking place in separate places dedicated for those things, the social media platforms aim to offer users a one-stop shop for all of their potential information needs. This consolidation allows for social media platforms to establish profiles on their users. They collect data you're willing to share, generate more data on you from your habits and real-world habits, and then throw content at you that they think will keep you engaged on their platforms. And this includes the supposedly innocuous service of the search engine in Google. The common goal that they all have gotten much better at over the years is to get you to click on things and stay engaged with the platform. And so often the content that gets you to click is engaging precisely because it is outrageous or otherwise designed to provoke you. For me, this started with aggregator websites like Dig. Dig.com is now just blog spam like so many other flash-in-the-pan websites of the time. But back in 2006 or so, it was really the first place I knew of on the internet where I could just mindlessly scroll and click and see pictures of dogs and cats and read headlines that were wild, and vote on them too. It was all pretty surface level stuff, but sometimes that's all I really wanted. To put it in a different way, I basically stopped watching TV after Dig came around. And then, when its user base fled to Reddit for reasons nobody really remembers, that was pretty much it for me. Reddit contained both the easy come, easy go content I liked on Dig, but also was a place where I could ask my obscure questions about anarchist philosophy or elevator repair or whatever, and get not just an answer but a whole conversation, just like the old forums. And I really feel like Reddit is on the more innocuous end of social media. Facebook, which I used to use, transformed from a place where you could stay connected to your school friends to a place where you can go on a date, live stream your car repair, send poop emojis to your senator, and buy flowers all at the same time. Facebook is, year by year, attempting to subsume more and more of the public square onto its own proprietary soil, where they have the ability to sell the shit out of things to you with metric tons of ads. So, I have to imagine throwing 12 or 13-year-old me into this mix. 12 or 13-year-old me was just coming off a run of a dozen years or so of unself-conscious bliss. And suddenly, I was intensely aware of what other people thought of me. I was falling in love every day over and over and beating myself up about it, my attempts to talk to girls, even if the conversations went just fine. And I really wanted to be seen as a peer by adults. Today's internet would be a very bewildering place for that me to be. Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok would probably make my social life feel even more competitive and dramatic than it already did with just AOL Instant Messenger. The exposure to the unending feed of tragedies, accusations, and controversies on Twitter and Reddit would probably make me feel under attack all the time. My interests in video games, explosions, guns, and cars would probably have led me down the YouTube rabbit hole that ends in the manosphere. Danger. And as it pertains to dating and sex, subjects with outsized importance to me as a teen, I'd probably be getting fed all kinds of faulty information sold as secret knowledge about women, about so-called male archetypes, and about what it means to be a man from a variety of misogynists. Amid all the bullshit, I wouldn't be surprised if I ended up vulnerable to or even seeking out some form of disillusionment, which internet grifters would be happy to offer me in the form of a red pill. And I fear I would have had very little ability to counteract the pressure of it all. But maybe I'm wrong to be afraid. Maybe I'm underestimating human resiliency and our ability to digest social poisons like these in formative times, like adolescence. Or maybe it's messages of support like this one that I'm trying to send that actually restore balance bit by bit to the media landscape and therefore to people's lives. I do hope that I can in some way counteract the grifters that hold out simple and shitty solutions to life questions that can't be answered by a series of videos that are each conveniently long enough to generate ad revenue. If you're watching this, I hope all these words motivate you to think for yourself and about yourself, because those skills, confidence and empathy, having the will to believe yourself and the compassion to recognize that you're worth hearing, are really what it takes to avoid falling into antisocial traps. Coming of age. A fool's errand. Identity. About 12 years into my life, I became a hormonal dumping ground that brought on the physiological changes of adolescence. I started to notice myself and others as sexual creatures, and I fell into anxiety about who I was becoming. A feeling of needing to keep up with the Joneses, except with my actual body and thoughts. I sank into a perspective that up until this adolescent awakening, I had been living blindfolded, and that I could not continue to be the person I was. I feared that if I didn't take control of my life by doing I'm not sure what, then I'd be destined to be a child forever. My fear of not becoming an adult was a major psychological kick in the ass, to start figuring out just who the fuck I was. This all strikes me now as pretty normal for someone at that age, but back then I was the center of it, and no one knows what it's like. The realization that hit me in adolescence, that life is without any inherent direction and is essentially pointless, was a scary one to reckon with, and is why I attempted to define myself. As Jean-Paul Sartre put it, we are condemned to be free. An ironic statement, but as anyone who has tried creative writing can attest, a blank page with only the hope of making something great can feel like a prison. Much like establishing a writing prompt, creating a personal identity introduces some constraints on who it is you're going to become, which ironically is freeing. Taking on an identity neutralizes the paralysis of the question, who am I? And beckons the inner monologue to progress to, I am X, so I should Y. I'm a hippie, so I should do yoga. I'm a Christian, so I should go to church. I'm a gamer, so I should drink Monster and blame women for As Sartre also said, in a needlessly gendered way, man chooses and makes himself by acting. Life doesn't permit you to stand still. So what are you gonna do? Which is to ask, who are you gonna be? Our identities can be true to our realities, or they can be delusional, or they can be aspirational. Regardless of what we choose to be, if we feel strongly about it, then we will keep acting and we will keep living. I think what I was just getting into is a good reason why so many thousands of well-meaning high school English teachers make their students read The Stranger each year. I also had to, but I couldn't really get much out of it under the coerced circumstances at the time. In the validation feedback loop of grades, I was just trying to get by without making anyone mad. The content itself was rarely on my mind, but that wasn't really my fault. The conventional education system is designed to destroy the otherwise worthwhile activity of thinking, talking, and writing about intellectual stuff. If school instead positioned us to concern ourselves with the content first, then The Stranger would have, I'm sure, acted as a wake-up call of the kind I'm currently trying to deliver. Teenagers need to hear this stuff because it offers a foothold on problems that concern them. It just needs to be delivered by a system or a person that they don't despise. But I digress. Identity continued. Our identities accumulate as a series of mental shortcuts that we use in every kind of situation, both petty and significant. I'm a person who just doesn't like ketchup can be as much a building block of one's identity as something insane, like I'm a person who just thinks Hitler was onto something. In both cases, the premise is difficult to challenge, despite facts and experience of others, because it is part of one's identity and one's ego relies on acting as though it were true. Shrugging off these challenges is imperative, in fact, because after all, if I'm wrong about this thing, what else might I be wrong about? Every step on the journey of identity has the potential for being one which needs to be unwound later on. A day in your 40s might come when you realize that, again, you've been living life without agency, and that your life up to that point has felt like a sham. In the case of going back on feelings about ketchup, it's not a big deal. You can easily forgive yourself for having missed out on sugary tomato paste for all those years. In the case of admiring Hitler, the resulting identity crisis could be catastrophic to the individual's survival. Realizing the harm one has caused and the amount of work it will take to regain trust in others could do a person in. If we take the cycle of identity crises as being inevitable, which I do, then I think it's important to front load the bulk of this stuff in life. I'd rather have people have their midlife crises while they're still children, while their bodies and minds are still flexible, and before they have to work jobs, pay rent, or God forbid, take care of kids of their own. Even if that weren't true, it's better to spend a few months or weeks deluding yourself than years or decades. But it is true. Humans are not limitlessly flexible, and they become less and less so as they age. If you spend enough time living a lie, that lie will become your truth. We become the collection of stories that we tell about ourselves, and we are less able over time to envision ourselves as different people. And this is why I'm thinking about the problem of shitty identities like Sigma male in terms of young people. It's pretty trite to say, but this isn't just because old people are statistically closer to death. There's nothing inherent about age which should mean that older people are less able to hear people and change themselves. But it does happen to be the case with us. People tend to become playbooks of old stuff that has worked well enough, such that they can ignore new information because they're already getting by. So it's worth talking to young people because they can actually hear you and respond on the basis of what you're saying, instead of on the basis of their fossilized identity. Typology. Similar to how we shortcut existential dread with the tool of identity, we also often shortcut the question of identity itself through a reliance on typologies. We are a species that is built on pattern recognition in the service of spending less energy on brain stuff wherever possible. Because of that, we're always attempting to classify what we see and sort it away into its category with things that are alike, so that we don't have to think about it again. This is pretty effective for a lot of what we need to do, but there are a few areas where this is more fraught than when we consider human behavior. For the most part, we establish typologies about people by noting some superficial characteristics about a particular person and associating their behavior with all other people who share those superficial characteristics. Usually the characteristics we jump on are those where the individuals differ from us, and typically the behavior in question is shitty behavior. That is, this kind of pattern recognition usually matches the schema of strangers bad. These are what we call stereotypes, and people unfortunately put a lot of stock in them. They are psychologically extremely difficult to avoid and the cause of a lot of grief in a society where we are constantly around people who are not like us. There are also formal typologies of human behavior like the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, which purport to characterize a person's behavior based on a number of parameters, but also much less serious efforts to do the same thing via personality tests. Which Hogwarts house do you belong in? Which character from Cars are you? Which real car are you? What flavor of ice cream are you? Myers-Briggs, for its part, characterizes people as either introverted or extroverted, intuiting or sensing, thinking or feeling, and judging or perceiving. It's fun to probe yourself with tools like Myers-Briggs, or which chocolate bar you are, but using it as any more serious a tool than your daily horoscope is probably a recipe for trouble. Reason being that both stereotypes and formal typologies rely on assumptions that are very likely to be faulty. Our tendency to establish opposites and extremes gets in the way when it comes to understanding human behavior, because the anchor points we establish turn out to be places where very few people actually do their behaving. If it's even fair at all in the first place to establish binary characteristics like introvert and extrovert, then human behavior is better thought of existing on spectrums that span the extremes. And we don't even really need to get into the faultiness of stereotypes, which are generally more concerned with behavioral types like criminal and innocent, which aren't behavioral types at all. They're extremely loaded and culturally bound. An ounce of objectivity reveals that generally ascribed behavior is the result of particular material circumstances and not generally held superficial ones. In the end, the pattern recognition tools that we have are inadequate for the task of categorizing human behavior, so why bother with them? It'd be like jumping to the last page of a book and saying you've read the book. Well, sometimes we do that, and we can't really help it because we are impatient. Typologies on offer to those seeking quick answers, like the Myers-Briggs, the Manosphere's male archetypes, or astrological signs, for those who take them too seriously at least, appeal to our desire to shortcut matters of identity. They provide fill-in-the-blank answers to questions that really don't have any easily expressible answer. Ever try asking yourself the question, who am I? It's a fucking hard question to answer. You could go in so many different directions and end up coming back around to the start to find that the mere act of articulating your answer has changed your answer. The reality of identity is complex, so the real answer to the fill-in-the-blank for any given person should be personal. And if you think it is important that others understand who you are, your identity should be expressed through your behavior. Nobody can provide the answer for you. What is called for is an approach with a bit more patience, reflection, and self-awareness. But even if we were to suppose that rigid typologies are actually accurate, human behavior doesn't work in such a way that today you're this, and tomorrow you flip a switch and you just are something else. We change gradually over time, akin to a vehicle that has to steer to change direction, rather than being able to turn instantly. This isn't to invalidate radical experimentation with identity, it's just to say that it's only realistic to expect transformation, especially radical transformation, to take time. The marketplace of identities. So, okay, I've tried to point out that while stepping into an identity is something that we all must do to survive, it's perhaps needlessly painful to hastily wrap yourself and others up in ones that are just there for the taking, as though it'll make the journey to a functional identity any faster or less difficult. In this way, identities that are handed to us as matters of convenience are all equally invalid on their faces. Where they really vary from each other is in their political content and the reality that they claim exists, so they deserve to be criticized on those terms. There's a whole world of cultures and identities being pushed in front of people for consumption, but what got me into this to begin with was the Sigma male identity, so let's see what's on offer from its purveyors and evaluate it on its merits. Criticism 1. It's non-specific. What we find in descriptions of the Sigma male is actually about as specific as a motivational quote from a fortune cookie. Listen to any of the mystifyingly common, hour-plus long Sigma male affirmations videos and see how long it takes you to identify with something that the speaker is describing as specific to Sigma males.
There's a powerful intensity in my eyes that other men around me lack. I can easily get what I want. People love to be around someone like me.
To be honest, some people might even refer to them as loners. But rather than seeing this doing your own thing as a sort of weakness, the Sigma actually draws inner strength from not needing the social validation that others constantly seek.
Number 5, humble leadership. In their careers and their lives, Sigma males are lone wolves. But in the right circumstances, they can be inspiring leaders too. Alpha males use power and aggression to lead, but Sigma males lead by example. They pour their hearts into their work, and their dedication inspires others to follow in their footsteps.
Just like horoscopes, these descriptions contain so many broad descriptors that it would be difficult for anybody, let alone just the target audience of young men, to not feel like it applies to them. Criticism 2. It's bad for you. Where specific descriptions do exist, they amount to a characterization of the Sigma male as being essentially like the alpha male in capacity, but not in manifestation. They are portrayed as individuals who don't have to chase women because the Sigma male is considered so enticing to them, owing to his strong individuality, that women just come flocking to him.
My silence is a vacuum that does mysterious things to people and social situations.
People in the room are looking around at both the Alpha and the Sigma, and they're wondering what it is about the Sigma that gives him nearly as much control over the room as the Alpha. And eventually they'll realize that it is the mystery that makes him so incredibly appealing.
Realistically, however, this is just the story of a young man who really just wants to get laid and already has some degree of buy-in to the alpha male story, but can't cut it as an alpha male. Sigma male is actually an identity of solace for those who aspire to be alpha males, those at the top of the hierarchy, but have found that they just can't do alpha male stuff in real life, which in a way is redeeming. There's nothing wrong with wanting to get laid, but the Sigma male idea requires its subscribers to be dishonest with themselves and say that they are above the fray somehow. It's a shield to hide behind, to pretend that their self-improvement is for its own sake when we all know they're just horny bastards. There's no reason to suppress your desire for companionship as a motivator for self-improvement. It's much better to admit your motivations than to pretend they weren't real in the first place. You don't need to measure up to the Sigma male myth of a pure individual because it doesn't exist. You are allowed to want to be a more likable person for the sake of your relationships with those people you are attracted to, and you'll need to learn to strike a balance in your identity between somebody that you like and somebody that other people like too. But of course, sex with a woman is not a prize to win by gaming them, which brings me to the next point. Criticism 3. It's bad for society. The Sigma male story is not just harmful to you. The Sigma male identity bases itself on a typology of men that presupposes that men have adversarial and dehumanizing relationships with women, but of course with other men as well. This is apparent in the advocacy for behavior that makes women feel lesser, like negging, objectification, shaming, and even physical abuse. Imagine you're a woman. How does life with a red-pilled man sound to you? Perhaps you've done this thought experiment before and you've come out on the other end thinking, yeah, sounds like a good deal for women. Okay, well try it again, but this time don't suppose that women are stupid, capricious, dishonest, and manipulative. These are the characteristics that must be ascribed to women for there to be any logic or justice at all in a misogynist worldview. The challenge with this empathy experiment is to imagine you're still a person worthy of respect despite being another person, a woman. If you're having trouble with this, then the problem is you. It behooves you to learn to imagine the joys, sorrows, and frustrations of other people, particularly women, because you are not the main character of the story, and there are no NPCs. This also goes for relationships with other men. If women are the quarry, then men are the competition. This way of thinking will alienate you from women and men alike, and no person is an island, especially a man. Advice. So, recognizing that growing up is difficult, here are some thoughts on approaching productively the problems that I've been talking about. Thought shortcuts. I don't want to advocate for people to spend so much effort contemplating their lives that they're failing to actually live them. We have thinking shortcuts because they are necessary tools for us to live, but just because they are necessary does not mean that the conclusions we draw with them are correct. This is the same reason that racial stereotypes, for example, are now widely and accurately seen as faulty prejudices that do more harm than good. So all we can do is practice being aware of them as we use them. Meditation might help with that, or so I've heard, but there are obviously pitfalls there too. If we don't somehow manage to self-examine and become more aware of our often faulty thinking shortcuts, we are liable to fall in all kinds of holes, or worse yet, snares placed intentionally by others. Identity. And there are people out there placing traps for us. That includes the typically thought of course-selling grifters like pickup artists, but also all manner of other individuals, religions, corporations, political parties, etc., who would attempt to exploit us by wielding blunt instruments to simplify the complexities of identity. People have to identify as something, so wherever the potential for a new identity exists, there's someone out there waiting to exploit it for profit. Because of the true complexity of identity and our proclivity as a species for grabbing onto simple answers, this is an exploitable feature of human beings. It's no coincidence that so much of the Sigma male mythology so heavily resembles ad campaigns for men's cologne or clothing brand.
You're a mysterious loner who doesn't care about the rules. Unga Bunga by Calvin Klein.
In our species' past, in times of hunter-gatherers and other relatively insular ways of life, the question of identity in particular would have certainly also been important, but perhaps a bit more grounded in immediate physical surroundings than today. The coming-of-age search for identity may have been on the scale of literally finding your spirit animal so as to take a name, much like many indigenous people of so-called North America. The range of cultural experience was narrower, so the identities available to choose from were fewer. I say this not to trivialize their processes, which would have represented the same internal challenge for the young people of those places and those times as it is for people these days. I say it just to demonstrate that the absolute scale of things is different in a global information age society. The scale of this society and the relative uniformity of economic structures worldwide, put in place by capitalism, allows for novel identities to exist in extreme profusion, to be broadcast to millions, and to have actually some bearing on your life. Which car from Cars are you? Which flavor of LaCroix are you? Which Hogwarts house do you belong in? Obviously, to subscribe to any particular commercialized identity wholesale would be a mistake, but it would also be a mistake to buy into the seemingly less profit-oriented identities on offer from self-help outlets, especially from the likes of pickup artists, because they are no less reductive, wrong, and politically motivated. To buy in would be to lie to yourself. And that's if these people are to be trusted that self-help is really their game. In so many cases, it isn't. Take the Sigma male purveyors, for example. They are predators preying on those who buy into pickup artist thinking, but who can't find happiness with it in practice. That is to say, everyone who has ever tried it. In that position, one can only conclude that one is actually condemned to beta tier or lower, or there is some as yet to be discovered theory that accounts for their lack of success, despite being overwhelmingly capable. Enter the new exciting discovery of the Sigma male. That it is actually presented in the same way that one would present a breakthrough in solar technology or artificial intelligence as a scientific discovery is very funny to me. But it speaks to the sad mental state of those who created it and those who would buy into it. The people behind the most watched YouTube videos about Sigma males know what they're doing. They're setting themselves up as the most well-known and credible representatives of this new subculture, and will assuredly execute on profiting on that position by way of merch and the typical grift of brain pills and whatever other masculine products that can be sold to the insecure. If you buy in, you've at best gained nothing but a midlife crisis waiting to happen. At worst, well, we've seen where pathological insecurity can lead. Jobs. Not that kind. So how do you find your identity? I once asked this question to Steve Jobs by email back in 2010 after watching his 2005 Stanford commencement address on YouTube. In it, he talks about following your passion and offers some nice advice for those who are fairly well set up for successful careers anyway. But what if you don't know your passion? What then? That's what I wanted to know. There are many valid criticisms of Steve Jobs, but two things are true. One, he knew what he wanted to do in life, and two, he got shit done. Expecting never to receive a response from my simple question, I was extremely surprised when I got an equally simple answer from him like 2 minutes later with 3 short sentences. Dance, try new things, and unfortunately I can't remember the last one. It was on a college email service which has since been deleted, but we'll go in order. Dance. I take this as a way to say don't forget to live in the moment. It is from a long series of present moments that a person is built. The process of becoming does not happen overnight, and you can't just wait until you've spontaneously become something to go out in the world and act. People don't become anything unless they do stuff. And other people are going through the same discomfort as you are. With some awareness of your situation, you can float along instead of being dragged. Also, literally dancing is a fun way to escape self-consciousness. Try new things. Don't be afraid to break boundaries. Your preconceptions of who you are your ultimate limiting factor. Don't worry about seeing yourself as a person who does not do X, Y, or Z. It's meaningless self-babble that is supposed to insulate you from the potential for failure, but in the end just prevents you from establishing a positively oriented identity. I think the advice of trying new things is useful for those who are struggling to find their identity early on in life, but is also equally useful to those who are struggling with the boredom of a life that feels fully figured out. I can't remember. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to make something up here, but perhaps the following is worthy of the previous two from Mr. Jobs. Use your imagination. So many aspects of a good life come from our incredible ability to imagine different realities. With our imagination, we can put ourselves in different places and times and be other people. We can see problems we didn't know exist, we can come up with solutions we never thought we could discover, and we can begin to understand the lives of others the way that we understand our own. By exercising your imagination, you will discover its limits and be able to understand how little you understand. Just keep in mind that your imagination isn't the only one, and it isn't actually real, so listen to others and heed reality. Thanks for watching and listening. This would have been so much easier if I had a British accent.
Sticking your cheek, pulling tricks, looking slick at all times when I'm flipping. Bar sipping, car dipping, Grant Wood grain gripping, still tipping on rapping, hoes, and no hacking, blowing on that endo, GameCube, Nintendo, 5% tent, so you can't see up.